first started having this conversation and talking about why I should care, why white folks should care. You just said this, and we've already had a conversation, so it's kind of hard to repeat what we did before, but you said this business about, knowing your neighbor and loving your neighbor, that it really isn't a choice whether or not I am in relationship with you, because God regards us as in relationship. That it's not, so it's not sort of a political issue that's over there. It's about, how do you live with your neighbor? How do you love your neighbor? How do you really share this good earth that God has given us? You talked about how important, we don't have a choice in that. Not if we're following Jesus Christ. We're open to one another. And so this isn't a political conversation. It's a faith conversation. It's a community conversation. It's a body of Christ conversation to come together in this. Yeah. You said it much more beautiful than I did.
We said a lot, and so
we did.
everything, right? And I think the Holy Spirit was working in that conversation in wonderful ways. But I mean, if we are called the children of God, right, then we are family, and so we have that responsibility to try to get to know one another, to be in relationship with one another, and when we fall or falter of that, to come to one another, ask forgiveness, seek forgiveness, reconciliation, to do the best that we can. Not everyone's there, and that doesn't always accomplish, but it does not negate that that's our, I think, inherent purpose as children of God.
Yeah. We also, in the last time, we talked about power and what power does. And in our country, oftentimes, we think of power as money. We think about power as authority or control. And you talked about, I don't know if you remember, but you talked about what you regard as power in a completely different way, and it was so inspiring to me. Do you remember what you said about where you think power?
Power is not those things. It's not position. To me, it's not. Power is, and I think about it because if I say God is all powerful, then to me, God is none of those things, right? To me, the power of God is that which considers you before self. The power of God is that which fights for those that are oppressed. The power of God is that freedom in the sense that it doesn't look like manipulation or control. Those are the terms that I use for those when whatever is happening is not an act of love, then to me it's not an act of power, it's an act of manipulation or control. For me, there's that distinct difference. And for me to call it out as what I see it, for me helps me sometimes. So when I see when I see legislation or acts that affect folks in bad ways, that don't help, that continue to help the rich stay rich, continue not to help those that don't, then I can't call that power, because that's not God.
Because it's not of God. So if it's power that's based on money, if it's power that's based on some sort of human authority, it's not really power.
I don't believe
it's something else. And power is this ultimate love that just surrenders, that just gives over.
Right. So what does power look like in the midst of like this conversation or action? It looks like doing those things that are uncomfortable because we know they're right. That's power. The power to speak up. That's power. The power to stand for love, the power to stand up for those that are being imprisoned or in cages, right? That's power. Yeah.
So it's that power that links into, in the Methodist Church, we say, do you accept the freedom God gives you? It's the power that links into the freedom that God gives us to fully live, and gives it to every human being to fully live. That's where the power comes in. So that's what we're talking about. If somebody says we're talking politics or whatever, no, we're talking about the power of God and what God can do. God can do. Wow. So when do you think in your life, like the concept of race, like you knew you were in these split communities, but the concept of race, and gosh, you know, when I think about that question for myself, when did I understand race? It was, you know, it was probably in college when someone said, I was an English major, so I took African American literature and read Native Son. I mean, that's probably when it started to sink in that there were people with a distinctly different life experience than I had had.
So growing up, did you never hear anything about slavery or the atrocities of slavery and even through, you know, Jim Crow and segregation and all of that? Did you not really have that awareness? Or
So I try to think about that, like just in thinking about, there was a Civil War. I think I learned that like in 10th grade history. When you talked about things
No, but I mean, that's a good point, right? 10th grade history, growing up in this white bubble, think about the books that you had to teach you about that. And so I'm sure you didn't have the full scope of that story, because so often there's a slant in the story. And that is so poignant to me, because I think about even the Black history that I don't know, because I have been kind of co-opted into this Americanized white society, right? And so what I was taught, what I heard, other than, you know, my parents may be telling me something in addition to, but I mean, they didn't know even some of the stuff, right? Because just, so that was interesting insight for me.
Well, yeah, and you know, and I think even in that notion of what I learned about the Civil War, you know, there was slavery. Abraham Lincoln was a really good person. I think this is sort of my summation of what I learned. And the slaves were free, and it was over. And I don't know that we even learned very much about like Reconstruction or, you know, even now I'm reading a book about President Garfield now, and he wanted the full vote for Black people in the 1880s, and it was really controversial. I mean, I'm 67 years old. I'm just figuring out, like, oh, you know, that's there's still like these moments of insight. It's the bubble. It was a white bubble. And you know, you just used the word co-opted. Well, you know, the other stuff we were doing, we were just growing up and we were looking at boys and we were trying to figure out, you know, how we would make our way through this and what we would do for a living, and all that stuff we were doing as well.
So for me, I think, like I said, I think my most vivid memory of feeling racism was that boy that walked past me in high school.
Did anybody did other people witness that, or did they tell him to knock
I'm
it?
sure they did, but nobody said nothing.
Nobody said anything?
No. Why would they? Why should they, right? Yeah. And so, you know, just as he was walking past me, he was saying stuff to his friends and, you know, all that. But yeah, nobody said anything. And for me, I mean, why tell administration? Why tell teachers? Why say he da-da-da-da? Because there was no confidence in white folks standing up for me with the history that I knew. You know, I mean, I had experienced and heard about those stories, right? The ways in which we were treated, and so there was just ignored. Mm-hmm.
When did you ever feel, or maybe, I don't know, that you had the power to sort of speak back to race, to racism?
That's an interesting question. Now that I'm older, I feel a lot more freedom to do it. Because I'm tired, right? So now that I'm older, but there have definitely been instances with my kids. You know, you can treat me one way, but when you attack my kids, or when that's a whole other thing, right? So having to step in and defend, not necessarily something I wanted to do or was really engaged, but it was a mechanism of survival and defending my kids. And so I think because, again, in order to survive in white America, there are certain ways you have to act. There are certain ways you have to be. There are certain things you don't argue about, or you don't mention, or once a night, you know, you just got to keep your job. You know, you got to figure out how to put food on the table, roof over your head, and if you can do that, you just got to figure out how to do that. And so you just kind of keep your head under the water just until you can swim, and you know, that's it. So, but here lately, a lot more. I've just felt a lot more freedom to do that, and still quite cautious. Yeah.
There's still, I would guess there still is blowback. There's criticism if you speak out too far. How would you? Okay, so when I was in high school, I was in a math class in 11th grade, and I had a teacher who I will not name, who said, and I was in a class with, there was one other girl and all boys, and the boys were all a year older than us. They were these big football players. It was very intimidating all the time. And so he said to me at semester, if you drop my class and go away from this math class, I will give you a B. But if you stay, I'm going to give you a D. I wasn't very good at math, but I could figure out my GPA, and it was a better deal to step away from that. He had just given up on me. He didn't want me to continue with math. And so the next semester, I'm in a different class that is not the math stuff. You know, I think of that in terms of discrimination. It didn't change the course of my life. Well, maybe it did. I don't know what I would have been otherwise, but as kind of this mild sense of discrimination, of somebody sort of saying, not you. And so for you, when and how did you experience that kind of stuff? I mean, how did the discrimination play out?
So my initial response is, how did it not play out?
So it just permeated everything.
I mean, so in applying for positions, in walking into a classroom and immediately being judged, or the prejudice around that, I see it in my kids, in how other white children treat my kids, and who wants to play with her or who wants to play with them and who doesn't. Simply because of the color of our skin. The ways in which people in stores kind of treat, kind of the eyes of, like if there's kind of like a security person or whatever, and he's kind of keeping an eye.
Do you feel that when you're in stores?
I have.
Wow.
Being pulled over. I was pulled over, and I was not speeding whatsoever. And when the officer walked up to the car, kind of saw me, accused me of something, and I was like, I don't know how. I had my cruise control, and it was like, okay, well, I'm just going to give you a warning. So I knew it wasn't anything. So just simply, so I don't know how it's not. I don't, because I think that's the systematic stuff, right? Of getting, loans, being denied for a loan or not. I know when we bought our home, when we were purchasing our home, we initially contacted one bank, and the person that met with us, you could just feel it wasn't right, and it was just going right. And there was nothing. So on the norm, people might chalk it up, oh, they were just having a bad day or whatever, but no. So we ended up having to go someplace else, And so there's, I don't know how it is. I don't know how it is not. And so truth, what I have found interesting is me serving, black females serving in white congregations. And I know that before I enter into an appointment, that there's those conversations, right? And I've heard even kind of after the fact of maybe some individuals that don't attend the church anymore because there's a black pastor. So I've had that, and I've had people that have suppressed their overt or kind of out in the open ways of being racist, because now I'm their pastor. But once I leave, that ugliness arises, and I find that quite interesting. So yeah.
I want to go back to, I want to just repeat something you just said, because it was an aha moment for me. When I asked you, when have you experienced that discrimination? And you said, I don't know when, I have not. And just your sense of, it's always there. And here's a difference between your life and my life. I am never conscious of the color of my skin. I'm never, the only time that happens is if I go into like an inner city community or something where I'm aware that everyone else around me is, typically in a black community, and then I'm aware that I'm the different one. But I easily can just walk out of that. I can step out of that. I can just, drive to another part of town.
And so that's part of the privilege that you have.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, just to think of that, I just don't have that consciousness ever, and I don't have to. And privilege. Yeah.
And so it's enforced in everything, especially in everything we see. So when we see images on TV, here just lately, right, we've gotten more black images or kind of ethnic images, within the last, I would say, 15 years maybe, right? Is 15, 20 years. But so when everything around you is reinforcing that, then there's, you know, it's the way it is, right?
Right.
And so from my eyes, though, I constantly see the Americanized white standards that is supposed to be the norm, and then I don't fit into that. And so, who am I, or how am I related in that whole context? So yeah, it's, but that's, I mean, that's the life we live. I live.
Yeah. To always, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but to always sort of feel like, nope, I don't fit there.